For 11 years, I managed the billing and reimbursement tracking system for a regional hospital network covering 6 facilities and processing claims for roughly 94,000 patients every single year. We handled Medicare, Medicaid, over 40 private insurance carriers, workers' comp, and federal compliance reporting that would make your head spin. I built the core of that system myself, layered it over 8 years of regulatory changes, payer contract renegotiations, and 2 mergers. And I was fired because the CFO's nephew had an MBA from Wharton and a subscription to a software platform he'd seen demoed at a conference in Nashville. I want you to understand something before I go any further. Hospital billing is not complicated the way a math problem is complicated. It's complicated the way a living organism is complicated. You don't replace one part and expect the rest to keep breathing. Every payer has its own rules. Every facility has its own fee schedules. Every contract has carve-outs, exclusions, timelines, appeal windows. The system I built didn't just submit claims. It tracked denial patterns, flagged underpayments, auto-generated appeal letters, and reconciled remittance advice against expected reimbursement down to the penny. It caught a coding error in 2019 that recovered $2.3 million in a single quarter. That wasn't luck. That was 11 years of knowing exactly where the money hides. None of that mattered on the Thursday morning when my supervisor called me into a conference room and the CFO was already sitting there. My supervisor looked uncomfortable. The CFO looked like a man who had already made a decision and was only in the room to make it official. He told me the network was evolving its revenue cycle strategy and that they were investing in next-generation automation. He said the word streamline 4 times in 6 minutes. I counted. I asked him what that meant for my position. He said they were transitioning my role out of the organization. Effective in 30 days. He said it with the tone of someone reading a weather forecast. I asked who was going to manage the system during the transition. That's when Derek walked in. He was 31 years old. He had a firm handshake and a laptop bag with a logo on it I didn't recognize. The CFO introduced him as the new Director of Revenue Cycle Innovation. Derek smiled like he was doing me a favor by being there. I said, directly and without raising my voice, that the system he was inheriting processed 94,000 patient accounts per year across 6 billing configurations, interfaced with 4 separate EHR platforms, and had custom logic built into every payer workflow that existed nowhere in any documentation except my own memory and 2 years of my handwritten process notebooks. I said that 30 days was not a transition period. It was a liability. The CFO told me they appreciated my institutional knowledge and that Derek had a very solid plan. I asked what the plan was. Derek opened his laptop and showed me a product demo. The platform was called ClearFlow. It had a clean interface and a lot of animated dashboards. Derek explained that ClearFlow used AI to automate claim submission, denial management, and payer follow-up. He said it integrated with all major EHR systems. He said the word seamless, the way people say it when they've never actually moved data between 2 enterprise systems in their lives. I told them ClearFlow did not support the custom fee schedule logic we used for our workers' comp contracts in 3 states. I told them it didn't have a module for the dual-eligible Medicare-Medicaid split billing we processed for 2 of our facilities. I told them the AI denial management they were looking at was trained on national averages and had no way of knowing that one of our largest payers had a 45-day appeal window instead of the standard 60, a carve-out buried in a contract amendment from 2021 that I had personally negotiated and loaded into our workflow rules. Derek said those were all things ClearFlow's implementation team could configure during onboarding. I said the onboarding timeline on their website was 60 days. We were giving me 30 to transition out. That meant there would be a gap. The CFO said they were confident in Derek's ability to manage the timeline. I looked at my supervisor. My supervisor looked at the table. I went back to my office and I did 2 things. First, I spent the next 3 weeks writing the most thorough transition documentation I had ever produced in my life. Every workflow, every payer rule, every exception, every manual override, and why it existed. I did this not because I expected them to read it, but because I was not going to give anyone the satisfaction of saying I left them without a roadmap. Second, I called my contact at a healthcare revenue cycle consulting firm I'd worked with twice before and told her I might be available soon. On my last day, Derek shook my hand again and said he was excited to bring the system into the modern era. I smiled and told him I wished him the best of luck. I meant it more than he understood. I want to be fair here. ClearFlow was not a bad product. For a mid-sized physician group with straightforward commercial payer mixes, it was probably excellent. Clean interface, good reporting. The AI flag logic worked well on standard claim types. Derek had done his homework for a certain kind of problem. The problem was that our network was not that kind of problem. The first sign came 5 weeks after I left. My former supervisor sent me a text that just said the workers' comp claims aren't going through. I didn't respond. That wasn't my problem anymore. The second sign came 3 weeks after that. A mutual colleague called me and said the dual eligible billing at 2 of the facilities had been submitting claims to Medicare as primary on accounts where Medicaid should have coordinated first. Not a lot of claims, just enough. The kind of error that doesn't look like much until a compliance audit finds it and it becomes a federal overpayment issue. I still didn't respond. I had been hired by the consulting firm by then and was billing at a rate I won't share because it would embarrass some people in this story. The call I had been waiting for came on a Tuesday morning, 10 weeks after my last day. It wasn't from the CFO. It was from the CEO. I want to pause here because that detail matters. The CFO hired Derek. The CFO approved ClearFlow. The CFO personally handed me the box on my last day and told the receptionist to validate my parking. When the CEO called me directly, I understood that whatever had happened in the past 10 weeks had cleared the CFO entirely out of the decision-making chain. The CEO's voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it. He said the network was experiencing some billing challenges with the new system. He said they were looking at a significant accounts receivable backlog. He said there were some compliance concerns that had surfaced. I said I was sorry to hear that. He asked if I would be available to come in and consult. I said I appreciated the call. I told him my current consulting rate and my retainer structure. I told him I required a written scope of work before any engagement began, that the scope would need to specify deliverables clearly, that my first priority in any engagement was always to document the current state before recommending changes, and that I would need full system access and direct reporting to the executive team, not to any individual department head. There was a pause. He said that was fine. I asked him to have legal send over the contract by end of business. I said I could start the following Monday. I want to tell you what I walked into that Monday morning, because this is the part where the story stops being satisfying and starts being genuinely sobering. The accounts receivable aging report showed $18 million in claims over 90 days. 18 million. For context, our standard target was to keep anything over 90 days under 4% of total AR. What I was looking at was closer to 22%. Some of those claims had already passed the appeal window with specific payers because nobody had caught them in time. That money was gone, not delayed, gone. The workers' comp situation was worse than I had heard. ClearFlow's default configuration had been submitting those claims without the jurisdiction-specific billing codes required by 2 states. The payers had been rejecting them silently, not denying, just rejecting, which means they don't count as a denial you can appeal. They just disappear. Nobody had noticed because ClearFlow's dashboard showed the claims as processed when they left the system. Processed. Not paid. Processed. The dual eligible issue had triggered an audit inquiry from a federal contractor. Not a full audit yet, an inquiry. But anyone who has spent more than a year in healthcare billing knows that an inquiry is just an audit wearing a friendlier hat. Derek was still there. He was in his office when I arrived. And he came out to introduce himself again, seemingly unaware that we had met. Or perhaps he remembered and hoped I didn't. He told me he was glad to have additional support during the optimization phase. I told him I was there to assess the situation and that I'd need access to his ClearFlow admin panel, all payer correspondence from the last 10 weeks, and the original implementation documentation from the onboarding team. He said he'd have his assistant pull that together. I said I'd need it by noon. I spent the first week doing nothing but documenting every broken workflow, every misconfigured payer rule, every claim that had fallen into a gap between what ClearFlow did automatically and what our contracts actually required. I cross-referenced it against the transition documentation I had left behind. Most of it had never been opened. The file metadata showed the documents had been accessed twice, once the day I sent them, probably by my supervisor, and once 3 weeks later, probably when things started going wrong. At the end of week 1, I sat down with the CEO and walked him through the full picture. I did not editorialize. I did not say I told you so. I laid out the numbers, the timeline, the compliance exposure, and a remediation plan organized by urgency. I told him the workers' comp issue could be substantially corrected with manual resubmission and some custom scripting I could build in about 2 weeks. I told him the dual eligible situation needed outside compliance counsel immediately, separate from anything I was doing. I told him the AR backlog was recoverable to about 70%, that the remaining 30% included claims that had passed their windows and would need to be written off. He asked me what caused all of this. I said the platform wasn't configured for the network's actual billing environment. He asked why it wasn't configured correctly. I said the configuration requires knowing things about the network's payer contracts and operational history that take years to accumulate, and that the onboarding team had worked from standard templates because that was all they had to work from. He sat with that for a moment. Then he asked if I would be willing to come back permanently. I said I'd consider it under the right terms. Those terms took 3 meetings to finalize. I came back as Vice President of Revenue Cycle Operations. That was a title that had not previously existed. My compensation was 60% higher than what I had been making when I left, plus a performance bonus tied to AR recovery benchmarks. I had direct reporting authority over all billing operations across the 6 facilities, and any future technology decisions touching the revenue cycle required my written approval before going to the CFO. That last part was my idea. Nobody pushed back on it. Derek left 2 weeks after I came back. I don't know if he resigned or was let go. I didn't ask. I had too much work to do. The CFO was still there when I returned. We had one conversation about the transition decision, short and professional. He said the network had learned a great deal from the experience. I said I was glad we could move forward. We have never discussed it again. The ClearFlow contract was terminated with cause 60 days after I came back. Their implementation team's failure to configure the system according to the network's disclosed requirements gave us grounds. Legal handled it. By the end of my first quarter back, we had recovered $11.4 million of the AR backlog. The workers' comp claims were resubmitted and largely paid. The federal inquiry was resolved without escalating to a full audit. The dual-eligible configuration was rebuilt from scratch, with compliance counsel reviewing every step. The recovery wasn't clean. Some of that money was genuinely unrecoverable, and there are accounts that should have been paid that weren't because of a 10-week gap between someone who understood the system and someone who understood dashboards. Patients weren't directly harmed, but facilities absorbed real financial losses. That bothers me more than anything else in this story, because I gave them every tool they needed to avoid it. I kept the transition documentation I wrote, all of it. When I came back, I expanded it into a formal operations manual, 87 pages. Every workflow, every exception, every payer-specific rule, indexed and version controlled. I trained 2 people on it and required them to train 2 more. If I leave this job again, when I leave this job again, 6 people will know exactly how this system works. The thing about being the person who knows how everything works is that it can feel like power. And in some ways, it is. But I sat in that conference room and watched them decide that my 11 years of knowledge was worth less than a software demo and a Wharton degree, and I made a decision in that moment that I was never going to be indispensable in a way that only I could see. Indispensable should be documented. Indispensable should be transferable. Because if it isn't, then the day someone decides they don't need you anymore, they take all of it with you when you walk out the door. And that's a loss for everyone, including the 94,000 patients whose claims someone has to fight for every single year. I'm fighting for them again now, with a better title, better pay, and a seat at every technology decision meeting going forward. And that manual, it's printed, bound, and sitting on a shelf in the server room, exactly where anyone would find it if they ever needed it. They would have found it 10 weeks sooner if they'd looked.